in our own place, in our own place, our own space.
All right, so Brianna's got us broadcasting. Now she's just doing the live streaming.
We are live.
Awesome. Thanks, Brianna. Okay, welcome everybody to our final Open Farms Q&A. This is the sixth of 6 Q&A sessions that we've done, and we've had a great collection of conversations. Looking forward to another good one tonight. We're going to talk about abattoirs, talk a lot about what are they and what are the issues surrounding them right now. So I'm Allison, Community Development Officer with Frontenac County. Also on the call with me is Brianna, who's a coworker of mine, and she's going to help us out, make sure everything runs smoothly with the session. And then I'm joined by 4 of our farmers in Frontenac, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, I want to welcome all of the attendees who are on the line with us. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your evening with us and talking to our farmers and talking about abattoirs. So you can see us, but we can't see you, which is kind of a bummer, but that's just how it works right now. So you can still ask questions, though. So there's 2 ways you can do that. There's the Q&A function. You click the little Q&A button, and then you type your question into the chat. We'll see that, we'll ask it aloud to our panelists, and then they can answer it. Or you can raise your hand, and then Brianna will unmute you. You can ask your question verbally, and then Brianna will remute you, and we'll continue with the session. So there's 2 ways that you can ask questions. And now I'm gonna jump over and let our panelists introduce themselves. So I'll just start sort of clockwise on my screen, and I'll ask Dave from Perry Farm to go first. Dave, can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Okay, I'm Dave Perry. We live on the Arca Road. We farm usually over 100 head of beef cattle. We raise Berkshire pigs, meat chickens, turkeys, and our son Grant raises Muscovy ducks. And all of our meat products go through our store, which is Food Less Travel, Local Family Farms in Verona. So we rely heavily on abattoirs.
Perfect. And Dave, can you tell us how long Perry Farm has been operating?
Well, I've been doing it all my life, and I grew up there with my grandparents, and our kids are 7th generation on the Perry Farm, so we've been at it quite a little while.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, Sarah and Rob, I'm going to ask you to tell us who you are and what you do at the Rise Farm.
So we are Sarah and Rob, and we have the Rise Farm in Godfrey, and this is our 3rd year farming, our 3rd season, and we moved from Toronto to start farming. And we are diversified livestock, so we have a little bit of everything, and we are direct to customer meat sales. So we also rely entirely on abattoirs for our farm business. So we have goats, sheep, ducks, chickens, rabbits, geese, pigs,
sometimes
quail, and a little bit of everything else.
So the only thing you don't have on your farm is cattle, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Or donkeys, because Dave sold out.
Okay, John, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and tell us about your farm and a little bit about your role with the FFA. Oh, and you're muted, John.
I farm at Inverary. I said it was my grandparents' farm, and we moved here. I worked across Ontario with natural resources for years, and then when we moved back here, bought my grandmother's farm in the 80s. We started into cattle, and we raised purebred Gelfie, which is a German breed. We sell most of them as breeding stock, and then the rest we sell through local neighbors, etc., for meat that way. But we have a couple farms here and rent another one, and I don't know why yet some days. but the Federation of Agriculture, I've been a member since we started farming, and I was president for 5 years of the county federation, and pretty well done all the roles as most of the leaders do, wherever they can step up to help and promote agriculture.
And can you tell us about the FFA itself? What is their kind of mandate in the community?
We're a strong lobby group for farmers across Ontario. There's roughly 38,000 members. full range of agriculture, from greenhouses to dairy to beef to turkey, chickens, whatever, crops, market gardens, the whole range. It's the largest farm organization in Ontario, and as I say, it's a lobby voice for livestock as well as crops, but they do a lot of lobbying with the government for all of agriculture.
That's perfect. Thanks, John. One of the other reasons that John is with us here tonight is because the FFA sponsored the Q&A session as part of Open Farms. So they gave us a bit of cash to help us make this thing happen. So we're very grateful to the FFA for their support in helping us execute Open Farms. So before we jump into our discussion and the questions, I have two videos. I have a video for both Perry Farm and the Rise Farm, and I want to share those now just so that all of our attendees can get a better sense of what these farms are actually like. So just bear with me here for a sec while I figure out my screen share. Okay, so you can all now see the start of the Perry Farm video, I hope.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, perfect.
We raise mostly beef, which is a breed of cattle. It's Maine Anjou, which are a French breed originally. We also raise Berkshire pigs, meat chickens, turkeys, and one of my sons raises ducks. My kids are 8th generation on that farm, so I grew up there with my grandparents, and they milked cows by hand until I was about 7 years old, and then we gradually converted over to beef cattle. And I started out showing in the 4-H clubs when I was a kid, and I had purebred Herefords. And in 1973, we started to breed some of those animals. My wife Kim grew up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and her and her mother used to attend the farmers market down there. So we decided to have the store. It's called Local Family Farms, or Food Less Traveled, because that's what we support. We support other local family farms, not factory farms. Frontenac's farmers tend to support one another. You know, if we don't have a certain product, we're not opposed to promoting some other farmer in the area that has it. We're like, you know, just happy that the consumer gets the product that they're looking for. My name's Dave Perry. We own Perry Farm, located near Harrowsmith.
So in the beginning of that video, Dave, Jenna's washing down a couple of cows, and we didn't talk about this, but your family is pretty well practiced on the fair circuit and showing cows, right?
That's right. Yeah, we usually show at 10 or 12 fairs throughout the year. And those particular animals are 3 bull calves. They're purebred, and they'll be used for breeding stock. And we had planned a big function in Saskatoon or Regina, Saskatchewan this fall for the 50th anniversary of that particular show and of our breed, but that was canceled. So hopefully it can carry on next year.
And aside from, I assume there's sort of a pride of product in terms of showing at a fair and, you know, getting that recognition. Is there anything else in terms of, you know, why you like to do that? What's the draw? Why do you like to participate in those fairs?
Well, you're putting your animals up against everybody else's, and it gives you, you know, a pretty good measurement as to the quality of that particular animal if they happen to do well at several shows. You know, some people, they have animals at home and they all think they look, you know, everybody's animals look good to themselves, but you have to get and compare them against something. So, and you know, people are looking for breeding stock. It's a good place to, if they go and scout out at some fairs, they might, you know, have a selection of animals they can look at. We've sold a few breeding bulls to Prince Edward Island, and I just took another order over the phone yesterday for another one. So, you know, the word gets out there, and it sure helps move your genetics around the country.
Cool. Another piece of that networking. So now I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll watch the Rise Farm video this time.
We're a small, diversified livestock farm focused on direct-to-consumer meats and meat products. We bought the property in 2017, moved up in here full-time in 2018, so we've just been slowly building and adding different animals and different products to sell for diversified meat. We do a little bit of basically everything other than cattle. Goats are a better fit for us. They can utilize a lot more different kind of forage than just sheep or cows would. There's a close abattoir, which isn't common in a lot of places where inexpensive farmland would be. Small abattoirs are something that are few and far between left in Ontario. There needs to be more to grow that in scale so that people can buy directly. The landscape on the Canadian Shield is very diverse. There's lots of wildlife. It's a beautiful area. My name is Rob Winnie, and me and my wife Sarah have the Rise Farm.
So you mentioned abattoirs in that video there, Rob, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But first I want to ask, why did you guys start farming? You know, Dave and John have, you know, a long history of farming in their family, but for you, you don't have that tradition. Why did you decide to start farming?
That's the greater control over what we're eating and how it's raised. And the easiest way to know exactly what happened to an animal is to be there from start to finish. So
I think when we first met, Rob was always encouraging me to try different meats and different kinds of foods, because in my past life, I may have been a picky eater. And just sort of, as we sort of went down that path, we realized that there were so many questions that we didn't know the answers to about how food got to even to a butcher shop. And yeah, we kind of took it to the extreme, but that's sort of how we ended up here.
That's awesome. Interest and curiosity about where your food came from, and now you're fully farming. Pretty cool. So let's get into our questions. So the first question is real simple. Just tell us what is an abattoir. John, do you want to start us off? Can you tell us what is an abattoir?
Yes, it's either a provincially or federally regulated facility that kills animals for human consumption, basically. And there's different types of them. There's some that just kill cattle. There's some that kill a range of them. There's others that just may kill poultry. But the basic function of them is to kill for human consumption.
Okay, good definition. And what is the difference? Dave, maybe you can explain this to us. What's the difference between a provincially inspected abattoir and a federally inspected abattoir?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so I just want to know what the difference between a provincially inspected abattoir and a federally inspected abattoir is.
Federally inspected.
And federally, okay, provincially inspected is they process animals that can only stay within the province. Federally inspected can be shipped out of province or out of the country.
Okay, and so is the main difference, like what would be the difference there? It's just regulation, different rules apply to within the province versus outside of the province?
Different rules apply.
Different rule. I'm only getting part of your question. Yeah.
Sorry.
I would say the rules are quite similar. Provincial abattoirs are smaller, but they still have to adhere to most of the same rules as the big plants. I think the big plants kind of dictate, to what some of the rules are going to be, and it's kind of onerous on the smaller plants to have to abide by some of those rules. Some of them aren't really, I wouldn't say necessary. Like they're getting more away from the safety of food and more into trying to please the public. And as far as I appeal, I would say a lot of the regulations are. And it's funny, during COVID, they've kind of relaxed some of those regulations, and the food's just as safe as prior to COVID. So I found that a bit interesting.
Interesting. Okay,
I
so
think,
we have
Allison,
oh, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, I think some of it's a relic of the past as well, that it's part of the interprovincial trade restrictions, that if it's only provincially inspected, you can't ship out of the province. So other provinces like that, they try to keep a number on how many federal plants there were. And it's part of trying to keep some of that trade barriers going, in my mind. And there's absolutely no rationale for it anymore, that we should be encouraging it as widely as we can, because we're just losing them too quickly. And I think some of the big boys would like to see all the little provincial ones go, and then they've got the mandate and the total control.
Okay, interesting. So we're going to get into some of those issues a little bit later on. First, I want to ask Sarah and Rob, can you tell us how many abattoirs are there sort of in our region or serving farmers in Frontenac?
Depends how far you want to drive to compare to what you call your region. Like we have one close local abattoir in the Frontenac County, which is Quinns, but like our next closest one is Sterling, and they do poultry and beef, pork, and rabbits. And then the next closest poultry abattoir is Kempville. So from me, that's either an hour and a half each way or 2 hours and 20 minutes each way. And those would both be considered our closest ones.
I've talked to farmers in the past, larger scale chicken producers in our region who take their chickens to sort of Western Ontario, Southwestern Ontario. Is that common? John, do you want to answer that one?
I don't know. I can't say for sure. I know there's ones west of here, but they're not on this side of Toronto that people go to. And as Rob said, also Kempville. But there's also the local one we've also got is that Wallace meets at the Joyceville Prison Farm as well, that does cattle and sheep. And I don't know if they don't get into poultry, I don't believe, do they, Dave?
No, they're not. Just mostly beef.
Yeah.
They don't do pigs either.
No, I know they do a fair number of sheep for some of the local farmers as well, and for the local market.
So all of these ones that we're talking about that are in our region, as we would say, are all provincially inspected, right? They're all smaller ones that would mainly serve farmers like you.
Yep.
There's also Farmersville in Athens, so they're about an hour 45 away from us, but they're pork, beef, and sheep and goat. I think they don't do poultry, so that's the other. The only federal abattoir that I know of that's close to us only does rabbits, and that's in Flinton. And they're a federally inspected facility because we bring in, they bring in rabbits from Quebec to be processed and then sent back.
So where's the closest federally inspected beef abattoir? If you wanted to be a beef farmer in Frontenac and you wanted to have your meat federally inspected, how far would you have to go? Dave?
I would say Guelph, Cargill and Guelph is the closest one. But once they get your animal, it's out of your hands. You don't get it back. They buy it.
Okay.
They just put it in their milk.
Okay.
I believe the Flint one, Rob, who they used to, anyway, I assume they still do pheasants or birds. They were doing a big export market on pheasants to Asia. I don't know if they're still doing that.
From what I heard, the whole there used to be Flintshire pheasant farms, and that only stuck around because everybody knew them as that. But the whole pheasant operation is, as far as I've been told, gone.
Okay.
They're just doing rabbits, 1,600 a shift.
So
wow.
I think one thing that Dave mentioned that's important there is that at the provincial abattoirs, you're getting the animal that you've raised back. Like you're the one receiving that meat back to be able to sell it to a customer. I don't know that people understand how the chain of supply, like the supply chain for meat, really works. But I think that's a good point for people to know.
Can you explain that to us, Sarah? So Dave said at the Cargill plant that you would, if you take your animal there, it becomes part of their system and it ends up mixed with, their other products and then to the grocery store. Is that how all federally inspected abattoirs work, or is that just their operation?
It probably comes back more to like what John was saying about keeping it as provincial barriers for sending stuff over the provincial borders. There's I don't know about the beef side of it because it's not something that we do, but if that's the closest one that you could take your animals direct to, then there's probably not really any left that are federally inspected that you would get your own animal back from. But that would be like the company policy, not the regulations behind it. That's just their business model.
Because they tend to be such bigger, like corporate type of abattoirs. The federal ones, they deal with the higher volume, right? And dealing more with like auction houses and contracts versus the small scale that deal with like custom services for farmers.
Gotcha. So is that the case,
Sure.
Dave?
But
Go
some
ahead,
of
John.
the provincial ones also will buy your meat as well, or buy parts of it. There's a few that, if you want to sell half to them or whatever, it depends on what they have for a retail outlet as well. So but generally most of the stuff going through provincial ones are going back to the farmer for resale or for self-use, one or the other.
Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add there? Is it if you take your meat to Cargill, is that a Cargill policy, or is that a federally inspected abattoir policy?
Yeah, I'm not getting all the question, but it would slow their chain down. They're not set up to handle private animals like that, like and custom killing and slaughtering, and they wouldn't cut your product up the way you want it to cut up. It's all boxed beef at a federal plant. They'd either send out a whole carcass to their own plants to be cut up, or else it's boxed and they're not dealing with custom slaughters and custom cutting.
Okay. So question then about the provincially inspected abattoirs. When you send your animal there, do they also process it? Like, do they cut it up as well? Or does that have to go to somebody else? Or is the abattoir sort of the one-stop shop? Sarah and Rob?
I'm pretty sure all the ones that we have left do all the cut work as well. That's part of the business model that but that might not have been how it always was. They might have just had a kill floor and then sent the carcasses out, but all the ones that are left are doing custom cutting, like Dave was saying, and giving your finished product back, or even further processing into stuff like sausage or bacon and stuff like that. It's just makes more sense for them to do more in-house.
Yep. So I want to understand the process from your point of view. What do you have to do in order to get an animal to an abattoir to be processed? John, do you want to start with this? You got to book an appointment, and how far out is that? And then what are all the other steps you have to do?
Well, to start with, as you say, you have to phone and make an appointment for a date to take your animal over. So you've got to try and figure out when. There's two sides of your animals, I guess. If you're doing finished beef, you're trying to figure out when it's going to be prime, and so book a date in accordingly, and then go there. And right now they're booking with COVID. It's about a 4-month booking ahead. A month and a half ago, I know when I talked to the one that they were booking into February then. So you've got to be fairly sharp on knowing when your animal is going to be ready. The other problem we have, always with livestock, is sometimes you have one that's injured, maybe breaks a leg or something, and you want to get it killed, and then emergency kills are very hard to book in, and that becomes really hard. They're difficult to transport, rules against them and stuff like that. So there's the two sides, and it's hard when it's so far away, as Rob said. When you have to transport them, you just can't do it humanely, so you end up putting them down.
So then you, once you get to the date, you take your animal there. It's not like there's a pickup service or anything like that. And then I assume it takes a number of days for this process to happen. So you take your animal, you drop it off, and then you go back a week later and pick it up?
Generally, either they take it the day it's booked in or the night before, depending on the operation that you're taking it to, how they want to operate. myself, I trailer my own, I have my own trailer, but there are people that will trailer your animal for you. You leave it there, and ideally you want to hang it for 2 or 3 weeks or maybe whatever before you cut it. So you're hopefully they've got the hanging room, chill room, that they can hang it long enough to tenderize it. And then they cut it to your directions and you pick the meat up.
So you say they cut it to your direction. So you have control over what kind of cuts you get back to the extent that those cuts exist on that animal?
Yes. They'll generally have a questionnaire they want you to fill in on how you want it cut and how many steaks to a package, for instance, how big a package of burger, how much fat you want in the burger, the whole 9 yards, you want any sausage, whatever your preference is. And then again, that changes with the species, whether you're doing pigs or beef or chickens, I guess, or what you get back.
So Sarah and Rob, what's your experience? It'd be a little bit different, I would think, because you don't have cattle. So give me your typical abattoir experience.
Same thing for the booking, like the booking times, because usually, like for pigs, there's a lot limited capacity for most of the small abattoirs, so they're usually booked even further in advance, just because everybody's going to want to get them done at the same time in the fall. But the hanging time for stuff like lamb and goat and pork is different than beef, because you don't really need to age it quite as long. So then usually it's all depending on what their workload is, as far as what they've got to do for cutting, for everything else, how fast you get it back. But usually the turnaround on unprocessed, just cut stuff is about 2 weeks-ish. And then anything that was smoked or cured would be a little bit longer than that.
Okay. Dave, I want to go to you for this question. You get all your cuts back, and for folks on the call, you're selling to customers. What happens if I assume there's popular cuts that go really quick, and then I assume there are cuts that are not so popular. What do you do with the stuff that doesn't sell quickly? Does it sell eventually? Do you use it for other things? What do you do there?
Well, our products all go through our store. So Kim does a lot of cooking. She makes a lot of prepared foods and using our beef, pork, and chicken and turkey. So she can utilize, those cuts that aren't moving as quickly as some others. And so it's a great way to kind of keep an even supply, I guess, of different cuts of meat. She makes turkey pot pies, lasagnas, what else? Mexican pulled beef, cannelloni, different products like that.
That's awesome. You've got the operation to use up those products that maybe don't sell as quickly. Sarah and Rob, your situation's a little different. Do you end up just, it ends up on your kitchen table, the stuff that other people don't want, or how do you deal with that?
Those are the farmer's cuts. Anything that the package is damaged, those are taste tests and dinner. But we don't have quite the scale as the other gentleman here, so it's not too bad for us. It's not always hoof soup or anything like that.
Hoof soup. Wow, what a visual.
It gets really hard with cattle anymore because a lot of people don't have good sized freezers, and the cost of a quarter, like ourselves, we don't sell individual cuts. It's either you buy a quarter or generally it's a half of a half, so that you get some of the front and some of the back. But a lot of people, they haven't grown up with some of these cuts of meat, and so that it's hard to get them to take that whole animal or parcel and they know how to cook it. And I think that's one thing that COVID seems to have been doing, is getting people back home and cooking.
Mm-hmm. And when you buy a steak from a farmer, it comes in that nice butcher paper, and it doesn't have any cooking instructions on it, right? So I think that's one of the things that trips people up. Usually they're used to seeing, preheat to 450, and makes it a lot easier when you don't really know what you're dealing with. So I want to get back to the idea of buying meat directly from a farmer versus buying meat in a grocery store. So if I pick up a package of ground beef at the grocery store, at a chain grocery store, let's say, not an independent like Food Less Traveled, am I looking at a package of ground beef, a pound or whatever, that is coming from just one animal, or is it definitely going to be a combination of more than one animal when it's through that sort of commercial food system. John, do you have thoughts there?
I think in most cases you're going to get a blend. You know, their mixing batches are a lot larger than the smaller abattoirs. Again, it depends on the store you're going to, where they have an in-store butcher, but very few do anymore. Where they used to cut and grind right in the store, that you could get one animal, but today it's all coming bagged or boxed and broken down into bigger bags and repackaged. So in most cases you're going to be getting a blend.
Okay, interesting. Sarah and Rob, did you want to add anything to that?
You'd probably be getting a blend, like, almost definitely, because they're going to be using trim, and the trim would just get bagged from all of the animals that they're processing then, and then that would go to the grinder. Whereas, like John was saying, if it was an in-house butcher, they would be dealing with one half of an animal, and it would be all the trim from that animal that would go into their house ground, right? But I don't think anywhere that I've seen does that anymore.
So on the topic of grocery stores, can you help me understand, Dave, this would be a question for you maybe, can you help us understand why we've seen shortages, especially in meat, during the pandemic? I mean, I know I haven't gone out and bought enough meat for 12 of me, I maybe stocked up a little bit, but certainly not like crazy. What's the reason behind shortages at the grocery store in terms of meat?
If that was for me, I just got part of the question, why was there a shortage of beef?
Yeah.
I would say, well, some of the plants had staff that got infected, so they had to shut some of their lines down. So they didn't have the same amount of product coming in to process. And then they had a lot of the restaurant trade was out of business, so to speak. So they had to change a lot of their cuts to, so that slowed them down. So they had a few hurdles that they weren't used to, I guess, and so operating under. But a lot of it was because of staff infection, I would say.
I asked a similar question in another session, and Becky from Maple Ridge Farm was talking about egg production, and she was saying essentially the machine is too big that they can't pivot easily. So they're faced with such a huge obstacle. They can't easily switch operations, or they're not small enough to do that. So I guess that's one of the drawbacks of relying on, or one of the dangers of relying on these larger operations. We're more sort of vulnerable to, in this case, a huge health crisis, and even other, maybe smaller issues. But that seems like something that those smaller operations, having lots of those smaller operations, could help us avoid in the future, or deal with a little more smoothly. Sarah and Rob, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're correct in that COVID really did illustrate the vulnerabilities in the food supply chain. It did, and it has opened up an opportunity for a more regional approach to production. But I think what has to happen for that to become a reality is that there has to be infrastructure investment, right? Like there has to be money put into creating new opportunities for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what you were saying with the eggs, like what Dave was saying with the cows, it's for the bigger operation, uniformity is key. So everything is set up to do exactly the same animal exactly and as fast as you can possibly do it, and any variation in that system slows everything down, and that puts everything in a backlog. So it's the consumer that wants everything as cheap as possible plays into the fact that everything has to be uniform to run at maximum capacity. And once that no longer can run at maximum capacity, there was no shortage of cows. The amount of cows in the country never changed. It was just the ability to get those into those big processing plants that were working at less than full capacity. And then once more time elapses and that animal's still alive, now it's outside of that structure of the size requirements of what they're running. So now it's all like, it slows it down even more if they're going to run those other animals, right?
Gotcha. That makes sense.
The,
John,
the other wrinkle on that as well is that the longer you have to hold it, because you couldn't ship it when it was ready, is the more feed you have to put into it. So your costs go up as a farmer, but as Rob said, if it's not inside that ideal range, you get docked on price because it didn't fit their model. So you're paying at both ends of it as a farmer. You're just the way it works at farming, that everybody takes you. You don't get to set your price unless you're doing it as Dave does, that sells at your own store type of thing. But one thing that we're lucky in Frontenac, in my mind anyhow, is we still have some small stores that do have butchers, and we have some good little local butcher shops that do handle sides of beef and process them and cut to your order, and that helps us locally. You don't get it with the big chains, but you do get it with some of the local smaller stores, and we're lucky that way.
can you tell us, John, what some of those butcher shops are?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us a couple of names of those butcher shops?
Well, Glen Burnie Grocery has a full-time butcher working there. Brothers Meats do a good job on, custom orders and that. Seed to Sausage do a lot of specialty work. Greenleys have done it for years. There's quite a few around. I hate to name them because I'm going to miss somebody.
I just wanted to give people on the call, an idea that there are shops, if you don't have a relationship with a farmer to buy direct, then there are shops where you can get local meat, and Food Less Traveled in Verona is obviously a fantastic outlet as well. I want to talk about the number of abattoirs that we have in our region now. We've talked about it being quite low versus what that would have looked like 5 or 10 years ago. Dave, do you have an estimation of how many operations we would have had in this region? Would it have been double?
I would say it would be, we probably lost 50% of our abattoirs, and within the Frontenac and surrounding counties. We used to have one just like 4 kilometers from our house, and it went out of business. Just someone bought it and then they weren't able to keep it going, and they probably weren't really trained in the business the way the previous owner was. And one at Marlbank, which wasn't too far away.
One in Glen Burnie.
Yeah, that's right. It was they didn't slaughter, but they cut a lot of products, and they processed a lot of pork and had the smoking operation there. They did a great job. So we're missing those people too. So we definitely need another abattoir in the area, and we could probably use a couple butcher shops. The local food was really taken off, but this is kind of a bottleneck. If you can't get your animals processed, you don't have the product to sell. So. And now the wait times are getting, out of hand. I know Quins are booking into April and May right now, and I was just had a meeting with the owner, and he's actually booking beef into next November, like a year from now. So, it's hard to, when you're into raising pork, you have to book them actually before they're born. So you don't know how many you're going to have born. So it's a guessing game.
Crystal ball, I guess. So you mentioned this earlier, Dave. I want to dive into it now. Over-regulation. So I think I heard you correctly. We're having some issues with Dave's audio, but I think you said that some of these regulations that are maybe over the top are being driven by consumer wants. Can you explain that a little bit more? What does that mean?
I have to repeat it.
Sorry. So
the inspectors' rules are, it's more for public perception. A lot of these rules, an animal that is slightly lame, some places they won't process that animal now. There's nothing wrong with the meat. It might have a bit of a sore foot, and it's discarded, which seems like a large waste. Yeah, so different instances like that. But during COVID, I've noticed the restrictions, like I said, they backed away from some of them. So I put a letter together. I drafted a letter, and I met with the Minister of Agriculture last year about this issue, and he's supposedly putting a panel together with abattoir owners on it. So all the rules are downloaded on them from government, that they have some say into it. So I hopefully that's going to take place right soon. So
Interesting.
How much it's changed, Allison. If I go back to when I was a kid, we would kill on the farm ourselves and sell a quarter or a half to your local neighbors or whoever. One of the local stores would cut it to their specification. It was never inspected. You didn't have people getting sick. They were all well held and clean, and they weren't trucking cattle all over the countryside. But it became a bigger and bigger issue on who inspects it, when they inspect it. The bigger plants, the more you look at all the recalls. You don't get a recall from these small little abattoirs. You get a recall from these big guys where they're mixing and grinding dozens of animals together and rushing them through in a hurry. And it's a perception that's wrong in my mind. And Alberta's just gone back to open up where you can kill on farm. If you sell the whole animal to somebody, you can have it inspected at the farm by a vet, but you can kill that farm, and it's going to open it up. And if Ontario would do the same, it would make a big difference in some of these cases, in my mind.
And John, is that a response to COVID, do you know, in Alberta?
I think it's probably partly that and partly a government that's actually doing deregulation.
Okay, interesting. Sarah and Rob, do you have thoughts or other things we might have missed here in terms of regulations that abattoirs are facing? What's happening there?
I got lots of thoughts.
Hit me with them.
I'm pretty sure most of them got closed down because a lot of things were unupgradable. So it was like stuff like the effluents and what happens with the waste products and the waste water for a lot of these places wasn't like, as they changed the regulations, when it came time to recertify places, they couldn't meet the new regulations. So it was just easier to close down. So Ontario, we don't have to regulate. We don't have to ban doing things. We just have to make it harder for people to do it that way. So that's like the big guys doing big slaughters. They don't have to say that we can't sell a half cow to anybody. They just have to make it harder for us to get it booked in somewhere to do it legally. And that's part of like how we lost so many of the abattoirs. Like John was saying, on-farm kills happened throughout the history of farming. Like it wasn't always you're taking your animals in town to get processed, right? Like the meat would be processed on farm, and like he said, people are getting sick not because of the fact that animals are getting processed, it's how they're doing it and what volume they're doing it at. If the line has to close down to be cleaned and sterilized, they're going to do that as fast as possible to get it back up and running. Whereas small abattoirs, if they're running one day a week is kill day, and then the rest of the time, that gets not used, cleaned, sanitized, and then the stuff goes into the fridge. It's a lot different pace as well, but that doesn't fit in with the modern consumption. But we definitely do need more options to take meat to. It's just how they're going to open those up and who's going to do that.
So that's a perfect segue, Rob, to a question that we've had from an attendee. What are the hurdles to opening a new abattoir? Is it the regulations? Is it not having the skills that a previous owner might have had? Dave, I think you alluded to that earlier. Is it the challenges of starting a new business? Is it margins are thin? What if I wanted to start an abattoir? What is it that's going to get in my way? Rob and Sarah, do you want to start?
A lot of the times it's going to be upfront costs that's going to take time to pay back. Obviously the whatever the regulations that you're going to have to build to would be doable. It's just you need to have the capital to set aside and know that you're investing in a community rather than you're going to get your money back at $60 per animal over the course of the next 10 years kind of thing. There is going to be profit in it, and it is going to make money. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any. But that would be the biggest thing: is somebody looking to invest into a community as an infrastructure, and that the draw is going to bring animals and business from the surrounding area, not just wherever that abattoir goes in. Like the biggest newest one that got put in, I think, is in North Bay or Thunder Bay, and the gentleman is basically pulling everything and having it slaughtered halal, and all of that meat. It would be a plant similar to Cargill, and it's gigantic. But adding the halal certification to it bumps the value, right? So he's buying all this cattle from the northern area, but it's a federally inspected plant and it's a closed loop, and all of that is getting flown out of the country. And that would be the biggest, newest abattoir or processing plant that's been put in Ontario in years. If we had something similar, like this, the states have meat lockers, is what they call them, and like they'll even store and age your meat for you in those locations. But we don't have really anything like that at any kind of scale.
I think also, Allison, you touched on skilled workers. Your example of when people buy directly from a farm and it doesn't have the instructions on the butcher paper. If people can't even cook a piece of meat without instructions, how many people can actually break down a whole animal? I mean, we're new to the game and we're from Toronto, and a lot of our customers don't even know how to break down a chicken. So
Interesting. John, do you have any thoughts on the barriers to starting a new abattoir?
Dollars is a big one because of the regulations. I said, what's ironic is either I or somebody else, I could have somebody come here, come to the farm, kill a deer, take it and get it cut, and there's no hassle. Give it to their friends, do whatever they want with it. But I can't take a beef out of the same field and kill it and do anything with it. And unless I cut it myself, I can't even take it someplace to get cut unless it's been inspected. So if I take and raise a beef, we'll say, just for rounding it off, I'm exaggerating, but I say if I keep it for 2 years, take it for a day, or put in place to an abattoir, and they take it for a couple hours and kill it and cut it up. In essence, they're going to take a quarter of my beef for that time period, and I get 3/4 for keeping it for 2 years.
Right.
And it's just a whole economic number. It doesn't work. The model is failing us.
Dave, I have a question for you. There's an abattoir that Rob mentioned earlier. I think it's in Athens, and I think it was at one time, I'm not sure if it still operates, but it was a co-op. So I think there was a number of farmers in the area who said, we really got to do something. Let's start one of these things. Is there any drive, or would it even be possible for a group of farmers, let's say in Frontenac, to get together and start a abattoir as a co-op?
He's muted.
Oh, you're muted, Dave.
Dave, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm not getting the whole question.
What about an abattoir as a co-op? Would there be any desire or capacity?
Try again.
What about an abattoir as a co-op model? A group of farmers getting together and starting an operation?
No, I'm not getting the question.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
We find it a lot easier if there's not a lot of movement. I don't know if it's on the other end or this end. Can you hear us?
Yeah, it's a little bit choppy, but I can hear you. Here, I'm going to put my question into the chat, and maybe you can pull it up that way. In the meantime, John, do you want to share any thoughts on that idea?
You're muted, John. John, you're muted.
No, yep. Okay, we were part of a co-op that was set up after BSE hit that GenCore ran, and you bought, as a member, you bought so many hooks by quarter to when you could ship your cattle to it. And it worked for a little while, but it went under, and it was big and had a lot of money behind it. And it eventually failed. They lasted maybe, I'm going to say 3 years at the most, but they had pickup locations where you could take your animal and they would truck them to Guelph to where their abattoir was. But it was a means of trying to address the surplus cow situation at the time of BSE, when there was no export market. So I don't know. I don't know that it would work. I just don't know that there's enough cattle in Frontenac to keep it going that way.
So do you know, John, why that co-op failed?
I'm gonna have to assume it was just economics. You know, that they get into that size scale and they got to compete with the big boys, and it's tough to do. You know, when they're going on volume and you're trying to compete with them with a lot less volume, you've got to charge a better premium. You know, there's just, it's all it's fine. You know, every agricultural product that we deal with, basically, there's three big boys that run it. It doesn't matter whether it's fertilizer, seed, or abattoirs, or whatever it is. You're restricted, and they're the ones with clout. And government regulations have pushed you that way because they like the big plants because they can send their inspectors to that plant, and they stay there every day. Where all the little guys, the inspectors have to run around the countryside, so they can reduce the number of inspectors they have. And if they go to a little plant, they might inspect 3 or 4 animals in a day, where if they go to a big plant, they're inspecting thousands. And so there's economics. You know, the regulations are set up for the few people that don't want to comply, instead of encouraging the majority of us that would put out a good, healthy product, of allowing you to operate. It's just the way the world works.
Dave, I don't know. Did you get the question? Did you want to weigh in on a co-op model?
Say it fast, we can hear it.
I know it's been discussed. It's just nobody really wanted to be the manager. We haven't got anybody to really take the bull by the horns. And then available labor's another issue, I guess. I've got some plans on maybe what should happen with Quinn's, but I was hoping an Amish or Mennonite, maybe 2 families will move into the area and take that over. So I'm starting to work with a real estate agent on that issue. So maybe it'll come to fruition, I hope.
So Quinn's is our closest abattoir, and they are currently, the owners are wanting to retire and sell, right?
Right, yes.
So what happens if we lose more of these small scale abattoirs? I assume that pushes some farmers out of business. Do they turn to the federal program? What's the alternative? Is there one?
That's the pivot.
Yeah. The alternative is either travel further or go out of business. You don't go to a federal abattoir. That's not an alternative.
No, you ship your animals to Cookstown or someplace where it gets shipped into a federal plant, and you've lost total control and you don't get it. But you know, you're just raising animals to ship. That's all. You don't get to do the business that Rob and Dave are doing if you don't have local abattoirs.
So we're about 5 minutes away from the end of the session, and I'm hoping you can tell us what we can do as eaters, if anything, to help this situation. Is there anything I can do as somebody who's not a farmer but who does eat meat to help? Sarah and Rob, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's voting with your dollars like everything else, and the like where you put the value on what kind of meat you eat and how it was raised and where it came from. I'm not saying that any of the big, huge places like care any less, but you're going to know that the farmer that raised that animal from a baby all the way to finishing it and knows everything about it is a different scenario than a feedlot. So it's why it costs more. It costs us more to do it. We're not getting the feed discounts at volume. We're not getting the processing discounts. Everything along the chain costs us more too, and that's why it does cost more to the end consumer. But that it's voting with your dollars, because like the grassroots movement of getting more abattoirs in place isn't going to mean anything if at the end of the day people still want to go to Costco to buy the sad chicken and the sad pork. It's just voting with your dollars, and it's a little bit harder sometimes to buy from a farmer. It might mean you're getting meat delivered in a cooler from the guy that raised it, or you're picking it up from the farm that it came from, which is a little bit different than your cellophane packs of nitrogen treated meat with instructions on it. But at the end of the day, the quality and the quality of life for the animals is a completely different ball game. So it's just voting with your money and knowing that's why it costs more.
It's quality over convenience, right? Like putting the importance that what you're putting into your body to like as nutrients, you want the best quality product. And if that's something that you care about, you take the extra effort to find out how you can make that happen.
John, any advice for consumers that want to help?
Well, my advice would be get to know your farmer and get to know your butcher. And that puts it back into Rob's shop of voting with your dollar. You know, where are you going to shop?
Dave, advice for consumers that want to help with this issue?
I would say contact your member of parliament, contact your local councillors. They're in touch with provincial governments. Make them aware that, you know, you want to buy local food and it's getting harder to obtain. Support your local farmers and people that produce local food as much as possible, so that helps enable them to stay in business. And eat real food. Don't eat Trump food. I mean, fake food.
So on the topic of supporting farmers, I want to talk about where people can purchase your products. So Fairy Farm, obviously available at Food Less Traveled in all shapes and forms. Sarah and Rob, the best bet for purchasing from you is through your online store?
Yep. So we have all of our available products under available now, as well as a list of the products that we do carry that can be ordered in advance due to the backup at the abattoirs, especially for our goat and lamb. Yeah, and talk to your farmers, reach out and ask them questions. But yeah, that's the best way. And we do free local delivery as well, or you're welcome to pick up at the farm.
Awesome. And John, it would be a matter of getting in touch with you if somebody wanted to purchase beef from you?
If we do, but I say, we don't get down into the individual cut, so it's either you buy a minimum is a half of a half. So most people are looking for smaller portions or smaller outlay of dollars at that time.
So how does that work if I were to buy a half of a half from you? Do I get a say in what kind of cuts I get, or is it just you sort of divide it up and I get what I get?
You get what you get. Basically, you get to say how you want it cut, but if you look at a side of beef, you get X number of whatever cuts on that side, and when you buy a half of a half, you would get half of all the cuts. And so that way you get some of the front and some of the hind quarter as well, because what happens if you're just selling quarters, that the hinds tend to go on the front stay, as Rob said, for supper.
So as a person who lives in the suburbs with very little freezer space, it might be pretty intimidating for me to say, yeah, I want to buy a half. But if I had 10 buddies and we all went in on it, then that would actually be a solution, right? We'd pick it up from you and we'd all divvy it up between ourselves.
Yep. Yeah, we can do that. You know, once you've got it, it's up to you how you want to handle it. Or you can be like us and have 3 or 4 freezers.
That's the thing. Like the freezer space is also a choice. If eating local and supporting stuff like that is the driving force, a small chest freezer isn't that big of an investment. It can double as a table when you're not using it. Everybody only has an icebox freezer now, but the chest freezer isn't something like they make them in small sizes. You put a lot of meat in a small one for a small family.
I think that's a really interesting point, Robin.
You could do like we do, Allison, is we've got several, and I said, I've got kids that shop at home.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that there's a whole other session on the habits that you need to develop as somebody who shops and purchases from local farms. So there's, having a chest freezer, there's eating seasonally, there's planning ahead. Obviously, if it's not about, stopping at the store and grabbing whatever's convenient, you got to think about your menu so you can get that package of meat out of the freezer ahead of time. I think there's a whole conversation there around what those habits look like and laying them out so that it's not so intimidating. Because if you've never eaten that way, it seems foreign.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like that's the one thing we try and do on our social media is like just show people that it really doesn't take that much effort to kind of just eat a little differently than you're used to. We had goat last night, and I think maybe it might only be like the 5th or 6th time I've ever had it. And I can't believe I went my whole life without realizing how delicious it is. And like the same with our rabbits, right? Like rabbit is my favorite meat. And so just taking that like extra step to sort of take a chance on something that's a little bit different, and the rewards are so much better than you could ever imagine.
That's a really great final thought. John or Dave, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with tonight? John, you want to go first?
I guess one of the ones that I know I've been talking to a young lad, local young lad, that he's signed up for a butcher course and that, and his goal is to set up a mobile abattoir, whether he can get that funding and approval and inspections done, but that way he would be able to go from farm to farm and kill it legally and do it that way, and that might help all of us. But whether that's a model that's going to work locally, we'll find out, I guess.
Interesting. Dave, final thoughts of the night?
I was just going to add in about the buying beef. At our store, we sell like sides, quarters, split sides, or a beef package, $80 to $100, or individual cuts. And I just want to emphasize that without these abattoirs, the local food movement is stifled. Like we can't move ahead.
No.
We can't have our animals processed, and you know it's a sad thing, but some of us would probably go out of business. Yeah, it's just the worst year now because the demand is so high and you're booking so far in advance. It's kind of depressing actually to turn people away if you don't have the product for them. You might have the live product, but you don't have it packaged. You know, it's not processed and readily available to take home. So we have to do something about it, and I'm not giving up on it.
Well,
it becomes an animal welfare issue as well. Is the further you have to truck an animal, the harder it is on that particular animal. So I think that we really need these local abattoirs. It's just a necessity.
Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that the increase in demand that we've seen through the pandemic is an opportunity for education. You know, that's one of the reasons that we were committed to open farms this year. And this Q&A session and this whole series, I think, has been really, it's been eye-opening for me. I mean, I grew up on a farm and I've still learned things in every single session. And I'm hopeful that, you know, this demand will continue through the pandemic, and the interest in learning will continue as well. And hopefully with that interest in education, we'll get more people aware of these kinds of things and committed to improving the situation. So thanks everybody for your thoughts tonight. Really great conversation. Thanks to our attendees who chose to spend the evening with us. Thanks to the FFA for their sponsorship of our series, and the other community-based organizations like the NFU. You know, there's a lot of great organizations out there in our community doing great work in agriculture and connecting people and encouraging new farmers, and you know, being an advocacy voice for the community. So really appreciate all of your time tonight, and we'll talk again soon, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Elsa.